Suspected my neighbor might like me, joined as her support bubble. Then things got interesting when her friends knew about me. I bought my first house in September last year, right in the midst of a strange time, but somehow everything just seemed to fall perfectly into place. The village I moved into is small and absolutely brimming with friendly faces, which meant I quickly got to know my neighbors, even with all the social distancing going on. And that's how I met my neighbor from across the road, who I'll call Elle. From the moment I met Elle, I was completely thrown. For the first time in my life, I was utterly, hopelessly lost for words. My heart was racing so fast and my mind just kept screaming, "Oh my God," over and over again. So there I was, fumbling through a blushing, awkward welcome to the village conversation, while desperately hoping she didn't notice the flush on my cheeks. For the next few days, we only exchanged brief waves and hellos, nothing more. To help me get settled, I had my dog, B, stay with me for those initial few weeks. During that time, there was a rash of dog thefts in a nearby town, which was honestly terrifying. I heard stories about dogs being stolen right from gardens, even snatched from people out on walks. If I had been working, since I was on furlough off and on since March, I would have sent B back to my mom's, but since I was home all day, she stayed with me. The police were warning people not to walk their dogs alone, but B is relentless and miserable unless she gets her twice daily exercise, a 10K run in the morning and then a long walk in the evening. I couldn't let her down, but I was definitely scared. And then Elle showed up at my door. She had seen me and B out on our evening walks and offered to come along with us, knowing about the dog thefts. I could have melted on the spot. Things snowballed from there. I mentioned to her about my morning runs, but she didn't seem interested initially, so I didn't make much of it. But then, a few days later, I quite literally ran into her while out. She joined me on the runs after that. Soon, it became a routine: run early in the morning, afternoon coffee, dinner most evenings, and that same comforting evening walk. It all fell into place so naturally, I barely noticed how much time we were spending together until a neighbor commented on it, making a cheeky comment about how nice it was to see us young gals getting along, and winked. She actually winked at me. That comment sent me reeling. Was there more going on here than friendship? Had Elle been dropping hints, or was I just reading way too much into the situation? I started replaying everything in my head, wondering if maybe she liked me, too. Here are the things that made me think there might be something more between us. I'd been running the same route at the same time every morning, for nearly 2 weeks before. Miraculously, Elle just happened to run into me shortly after I told her my routine. Every afternoon, I'd make her a coffee and take it over in her favorite mug, even though the first time I went around I swear I saw a really fancy coffee machine on her counter. It's disappeared now. She always complimented my coffee. Even after B went home to my mom's, Elle still wanted to go running and walking with me. I remember telling her B was gone and Elle immediately said, "I'll have to find another excuse to join you." And just like that, our daily meetings continued. She's made a real effort to bond with B, who is a notoriously anxious dog, and terrified of everyone except me and my mom. Elle brought special treats for B every day and worked so patiently with her. When I asked her why, she just shrugged and said, "It's important to me that she likes me and feels comfortable." Just yesterday, B actually fell asleep between us on the sofa, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Elle invited me to her group's fortnightly Zoom quiz, and when I joined, her friends immediately said, "Oh, so this is who we've heard so much about." It dawned on us that we had become each other's official support bubble. Elle asked if I was seeing anyone else. When I said no, she told me she was glad to have me all to herself. For Christmas, we exchanged really personal presents. I honestly teared up opening mine. It meant so much. And she even got gifts for B. But, every time I convinced myself she might like me, I'd start to panic. What if she's just an amazing person being nice? What if we're only friends? I feel ridiculous, but I'm so out of my depth. Elle is, without a doubt, the most incredible person I have ever met. I really, really like her, more than I can put into words. But the thought of risking her friendship terrifies me. She's become such a central part of my life, and I can't even imagine losing her. I never grew up around relationships. I was at a strict all-girls school, where there wasn't any dating, and then at a tiny university course, there were only 8 of us. Add to that a decade of struggling with anxiety, depression, my weight, and my self-confidence. Well, I can honestly say I'm the happiest and healthiest, mentally and physically, I've ever been. I've only recently become comfortable with the fact that I'm gay, but no one in my real life knows. I don't think anyone would be shocked, though, lol. The truth is, I don't have any close friends to talk this over with. Most vanished when my mental health was at its worst. So, I'm completely on my own, with only my fears and my growing feelings for Elle. What do I do? How do I find out if she likes women, if she might like me? I don't have the guts to just come right out and ask her. What if she says no, and I ruin everything? She's never talked about past relationships, and I don't know how I could even bring it up without sounding completely awkward. Like, "Hey, have you ever had a girlfriend? Want one now? God, I wish I knew what to do." Update 1. I had this whole plan to drop not so subtle gay hints into conversation like some friends had suggested, but honestly, everything just fell apart. Elle was pretty stressed out on Friday after a terrible work Zoom call and just really needed to vent, so it clearly wasn't the right moment to start making moves. I guess I must have been a little off my game, probably thanks to spending all day overthinking everything. Elle turned up on Saturday morning, rambling about how she thought she was stressing me out and even apologized, which completely threw me, for ruining dinner. Obviously, I said, "What are you talking about? You can talk to me about anything." She looked at me and asked, "Anything?" And I told her, "Anything." The tension after that was absolutely unreal, just the two of us staring at each other, silently praying our latent lesbian mind-reading powers would finally unleash. Suddenly, there was this loud noise outside, maybe a car backfiring or something, and the entire moment shattered. I went to make coffee, just to have something to do with my hands, but Elle followed me. She asked why I'd been a bit quiet the night before. I tried to brush it off, mumbled something about overthinking things, but she pressed, "What stuff?" My mind went blank. Just total, mindless static, every cheesy pop culture reference, every witty gay quip, completely evaporated. My heart was pounding so hard that before I realized what I was doing, I just blurted out, "You know I like you, right?" And then, to my shock, she kissed me. Kissed me. We were just in the kitchen, suddenly snogging, and it was so good. Turns out, she's gay, she likes me, and she's apparently been dropping hints for nearly 5 months. We were both so cautious, so afraid to risk ruining anything between us that we just kept dancing around the obvious. She told me she's been burned by straight girls before, so she'd been wary and was hoping I'd just explicitly come out as a lesbian so she could know for sure. Maybe the "I'm a lesbian" wall hanging would have been a solid plan after all. Her friends have been in on it too, apparently, trying to help her drop hints. She even showed me their group chat. Their ideas ranged from amping up the flirting to literally showing up at my place in a trench coat and nothing else. Also, shout out to the winking neighbor who's apparently been making sly comments to Elle about us and rooting for us along the way. So, no cake, no teary-eyed Brokeback Mountain viewing, just two nerds who've basically been dating all along and have about 5 months to catch up on. And as for all my anxiety about whether our lockdown schedule was date-like enough, completely irrelevant. We didn't even make it out for our morning run yesterday. In fact, we didn't leave the house at all. Update 2. We did eventually leave the house. Barely. I staggered into the kitchen on Sunday afternoon in one of Elle's hoodies, hair a mess, be doing her usual "excuse me, humans, I have" standard sigh from the doorway, and went to make coffee. Except, remember the very fancy coffee machine that vanished months ago? It had reappeared, suddenly and suspiciously back in its original spot like it had never left. I stared at it, then at her, then at it again. She went a bit pink and admitted she'd hidden it in the airing cupboard after the first time I brought her coffee, because she didn't want me to stop. She physically stowed a several $100 espresso machine in a cupboard so I would keep appearing at her door with a mug. I had to lean against the counter and laugh, which came out as something halfway between a squeak and a hiccup because, of course, she did. We had that chaotic, giddy day where everything is too much and not enough and the house feels smaller because you can't seem to be more than a few inches apart. Every time I had a little spiral. Do we say we're dating? Are we dating? Can I call you my girlfriend or is that too soon? She just stepped in and kissed the sentence off my face and said, yes, like she'd already been answering that question in her head for ages. B has appointed herself head chaperone. Any attempt at cuddling on the sofa ends with a determined 85 pounds of anxious dog wedged between us like a furry traffic cone, pressing her chin on Elle's knee and doing that tiny, please tail thump when Elle scratches behind her ear. See? Elle whispered into my hair at one point. Essential that she likes me. Which, yes. Understatement of the year. We tried to do normal things to see what us felt like without the hormonal fog. We went on our evening walk and got halfway down the lane before the winking neighbor popped out of her gate with a bottle of Prosecco tied up with a ribbon and a little card that said, "About time." Delivering congratulations as if she were the village registrar. I think I forgot how to have a face for a full minute. Elle took the bottle, shouted a thank you across the hedge, and squeezed my hand so hard my fingers cracked. The whole street seemed to be in on it. The postie gave us a thumbs up the next morning. The dog walking man with the dachshunds told me, "Good on you girls," like we'd just completed a marathon, and honestly, it kind of felt like we had. We also did the terrifying thing. I rang my mum. It was one of those calls where you can feel your bones humming, my mouth so dry I had to take a sip of water before my own name. Elle sat next to me at the kitchen table and held my hand under it, that anchor grip that says don't go anywhere, I'm here, and when Mum answered I immediately started talking absolute nonsense about the weather and the butcher being out of lamb, just babbling like a broken tap because the real sentence was stuck. In the end I just blurted it, "Mum, this is Elle. She's my girlfriend." There was a beat. Then Mum said, very calmly, "Hello, Elle, it's lovely to meet you at last. Do you take sugar?" Elle, bless her, said, "No, thank you," to my phone like that made any sense at all, and Mum laughed and went, "Oh darling, I've known since you watched Bend It Like Beckham 17 times in a fortnight and took up hockey. Are you happy?" And I said yes, and she said, "Good, then do you want your grandmother's chairs back? You'll need chairs if you're having people over again at some point," and I just cried. Proper, undignified, relief tears into Elle's shoulder while my mum chattered about posting a hamper and Weatherby liked venison chews and how the village grapevine had been very encouraging. I looked up at Elle and mouthed, "She knew," and she squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt. The first proper date was gloriously unglamorous. It poured. Biblical rain, hammering the pavements and turning the field into a lake. We attempted a walk anyway because B doesn't care about weather and because we were both too keyed up to sit still, and ended up sheltering in the crumbling bus stop on the lane, dripping from our hair and laughing so hard my ribs hurt. Elle's glasses steamed up so badly she had to take them off and then squinted at me like a confused owl. We shared a bag of chips from the chippy because we were cold and it was the only thing open, elbows bumping, salt on our fingers, our wet knees touching. She shook herself and doused us both a second time, because why not? I don't know if it was the rain or the golden chip shop lighting or just the ridiculousness of it all, but when Elle kissed me there, it felt more like a promise than anything else. Two idiots in a bus shelter, soaked through and grinning. Her friends demanded an introduction that night on their Zoom and were very smug in that way that only long-term co-conspirators can be. We signed in from my kitchen and they immediately started in with, "So is this official? Are we allowed to change the group chat name yet? We have a spreadsheet," and I nearly choked. They had a spreadsheet. They'd been tracking operations for months, apparently. Elle confessed to Operation Coffee Machine, the hiding, Operation Run-In. She set an alarm for 2 weeks to be accidentally on my route and then chickened out twice, and Operation B, treats, patience, the exact trajectory of scratches B likes behind her shoulder. "What would you have done if B rejected you?" I asked, and she said, completely deadpan, "Moved house," then cracked and buried her face in my shoulder. It hasn't all been sunshine and Prosecco, obviously. We are both a bit bruised round the edges, me with my decade of being small and careful, her with stories about a woman in her old office who flirted for months and then introduced her to a fiancé at the Christmas do like it was a punchline. We both have that habit of apologizing for existing. There was a moment on Tuesday where I went quiet and tight because I caught sight of myself in the mirror and my brain tried it with the old script, and she just set down whatever she was doing, came over, and put her forehead to mine. "Please be kind to the girl I like," she said, soft, and I laughed and wanted to cry again because who talks like that and why is it her? We did all the little practical domestic things that make everything feel real in a way kisses can't. I cleared a drawer for her in my dresser, she put her socks in it immediately and then looked at me like we'd just got engaged. She left a toothbrush by my sink. I gave her a spare key because she kept turning up with her hands full, flowers or dog treats or a bag of flour she'd queued for, and having to kick the door while I scrambled for it. She wrote her name on the keyring in my favorite pen and then panicked she'd ruin the key with the ink. She hasn't, obviously, but we put it on a lanyard anyway because we are now apparently the sort of people who have lanyards indoors. In a twist that made me want to evaporate into the floorboards, the winking neighbor orchestrated a socially distanced walk by congratulations that afternoon. We were wrestling a soggy bee into a towel in my hallway when a chorus of beeping made us jump, and suddenly there were 3 cars idling at the bottom of the lane, windows down, waving. Someone had strung a rainbow ribbon between 2 fence posts and a very elderly man I've only ever seen in a flat cap saluted us with a little paper cone of confetti. "For the bubble," he announced, and then looked faintly scandalized at his own enthusiasm. We stood on my doorstep, baffled and giggling, while people kept walking past, tapping their noses like they all had season tickets to our lives. Elle came over that night with a bag of ingredients and proceeded to cook me the most chaotic carbonara I have ever eaten. She kept stopping mid-stir to kiss me and then apologizing to the pancetta. At some point, she stood at my hob with her sleeves rolled and the steam curling her hair at the temples just a little, and there was this tug in my chest that felt like the first inhale after you've been underwater too long. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I know," I said, and she went very still and smiled at the pan. "We're not rushing. We're not telling the entire world, even if the village seems determined to do it for us. But I did text my old course group chat and tell them, and one of the lads replied with 23 heart emojis and a message that just said, 'Knew it. Proud of you,' which made me laugh because the last time he saw me I was a stressed 19-year-old eating my feelings out of a mug in the studio at 3 a.m. Elle told her sister, who sent a voice note screaming. We've both agreed no social media announcements because neither of us wants our work getting involved with our hearts, not yet. The important people know. That feels sufficient. We've started running again. It's different, running when you're not inventing excuses to brush hands. I don't feel like I might choke on all the unsaid things. She matches my pace without making a big deal of it. Yesterday we found a tiny cut through between 2 hedges that opens out onto a ridge I didn't know existed. The whole village spread below us like a model. We stood there, sweaty and panting and ridiculously pleased with ourselves, and she said, "First proper date?" And I said, "This counts," and she said, "Good, because your dog is about to roll in something," and B did, indeed, roll in something, and we had to carry her home laughing and swearing under our breath because she smelled like a bin. There's so much still to navigate that I can feel it like weather on my skin. But then she does something tiny, lays her hand against the small of my back when we cross the street, or unwraps a biscuit and gives me the first piece without fanfare, or murmurs, "Home," when we go up my path in the evening, and I stop trying to plan 6 months ahead and just stand there in the doorway and let the feeling land. Oh, and because the universe has a sense of humor, I came home this afternoon to find a parcel on my step addressed to the girls, the handwriting unmistakably my mother's. Inside, a tea towel embroidered with support bubble in florid cursive, 2 packs of fancy coffee, and a note that read, "Saw a special on espresso machines and thought of you. Don't you dare hide this one." I read it, started howling, and then walked across the road to where Elle was weeding her little herb bed and waved it over the hedge like a lunatic. She looked up at me, sun in her eyes, dirt on her knees, and that smile that changes the geography of my day, and said, "Do we dare tell her about the airing cupboard?" And I said, "Not if you want to keep your ankles." So yes. We're figuring it out. We have a drawer, a bus shelter, a small hill with a hidden view, a bottle of Prosecco on top of the fridge that we're saving for something we haven't named yet, and a dog who insists on being in the middle of every kiss like a chaperone from 1912. It makes no sense in every kind of sense. I can't quite believe it's my life, but then I wake up to her laughing at the coffee machine like it's a co-conspirator, and I think, okay. We can do this. We are doing this. Update 3. Mum's promised chairs arrived, bundled up in a heroic amount of bubble wrap and optimism. We lugged them into the kitchen between us, doing a supervisory trot, and when we finally freed the second one from its plastic cocoon and I sat down, it gave this deeply ominous creak. Elle put a hand on my knee to steady both me and the chair and said, very solemnly, "We are not dying under mid-century oak," which has now joined the list of sentences I didn't know I needed to hear until I did. We flipped it over on the rug to tighten everything and it turned into an archaeological dig. The fabric underneath was tacked on with 100 tiny vengeful nails. We do not own a staple remover, we have hubris and a butter knife, and halfway through levering up the lining something pinged against Elle's wrist and skittered into my lap. A tin. One of those old biscuit tins, the paint rubbed thin at the edge where a thumb would worry it open. My name did a strange little leap at the base of my throat the second I touched it, like the house had tapped me on the shoulder. Inside, letters. Brown at the corners, elastic snapped, the top envelope smudged with a thumbprint and a name, M, and then a little dash, and then E. I looked at Elle, looked back at the paper, and then did that thing where your brain runs through possible sensible options, leave them, hand them to a museum, wait 100 years, and your hands just open the first one anyway. We sat on the kitchen floor, ankles touching, knees making triangles of warm, and read by the edge of the afternoon instead of doing any of the things we had meant to do. The first letter was 1957 and I swear my heart clenched. It was all sideways handwriting and I will wait by the bus shelter at 5:30. If anyone asks, we were walking the ridge for the view, and please pin this under the seat like we agreed. There were 4 from M and 5 from E, and between them I could feel a whole world like a bruise. Sunday teas with mothers who had opinions, knitting circle code, the bus times memorized like they were escape routes. One had a pressed cornflower folded into it so carefully I had to hold my breath while I turned the page, and in the margin someone had written, tiny, still us. By the second letter Elle had her palm flat between my shoulder blades like I was a very spooked horse, and by the third I was crying in the infuriating silent way that sneaks up on you, tears off the end of my nose onto the paper. Elle did that soft, ridiculous kiss to the corner of my mouth that tastes like we're going to be all right and said, okay, into my jaw like a promise. We took the tin across the road because suddenly staying inside with all that history felt too big. At the bottom of the lane we saw the old man with the flat cap sitting on his low wall, hat tipped back, a folding newspaper precariously perched on his knee like a nap. I don't know what came over me but I just blurted, "Did you know M and E?" And his eyes did a clever old fox thing and then softened in a way that made my ribs feel loose. "Girl from the white cottage and Nell from the shop," he said, like he'd been waiting to be asked. We didn't have words for it, not the ones you can say in the street, but we had sense. They kept their chairs round our kitchen table, mind. Your gran bought them at the church sale when M had to clear the house. Funny thing, chairs keep you sat where you're meant to be. Nell from the shop. The letters with M and E suddenly made that little spinning click in my head where everything starts to settle. He fished in his pocket and pulled out a photograph as if he'd just been carrying it around for 70 years for a moment like this. 2 women standing under the bus shelter in dresses that skimmed their calves, hair tucked into headscarves, smiling like they just told a joke only they knew. I recognized the chipped corner of the roof behind them and the bolt that always rusts shut in the top left. I recognized, my stomach did that roller coaster notch, the way one had her hand resting on the other's sleeve as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "Don't let anyone tell you this village isn't made of spies," he said, tucking the photo into my palm. We all knew where to look and where to look away. We took the letters back and put them in the airing cupboard with the contraband espresso machine like we were introducing great-grandparents at Christmas. That night a storm barreled in with its shoulders up. The whole road went black with that satisfying snap of drama and the village sighed in unison, like someone had collectively decided candlelight was romantic again. Elle found the matches in the cupboard no one uses, the one with the emergency fondue set. Why do we own that? And we made a little island of light on the table. The chairs got pulled up close and the tin sat between us, and the more I looked at it the more something in my chest went squishy and brave at the same time. "I love you," I said, which wasn't a decision so much as a thing that happened to me. The words were out and around us before my panic could stand up. Elle didn't even blink like it might break, she just tipped her head and smiled at the candle like it had told a joke and then at me, steady as a lighthouse. "I love you too," she said, and it landed inside me like a coat that finally fit. We opened the Prosecco because I'm not a monster. The cork took out a bit of paint from the ceiling and somewhere at the bottom of the lane the winking neighbor whooped like our referee. We toasted to M and E and Nell and the bus shelter into chairs, which are apparently the most magical objects in the county. B looked personally offended by the thunder and insisted on being physically draped across both our shins like she was weighing us down so we couldn't float away. Every time the whole house rattled she made the grumbly wail noise into L's sock and then snorted, which is romance in our timeline. The next morning the ridge looked like it had been washed new. We ran while the air still had the metallic cleanness after a storm, and at the kissing gate we said hello to half the village because apparently that's what we do now. There was also a sheep. A very determined sheep where there should not have been a sheep, eyeing us like we'd invited her to brunch and then forgot. L, who has the sort of voice that makes people and rogue livestock behave, attempted to coax her back into the field with the language usually reserved for babies and nervous baristas. The sheep considered, made a strategic move towards B panicked about career change, did one grown-up bark and then hid behind my knees. 10 minutes later we had somehow become part of a sheep wrangling task force. Mr. Flatcap with a length of baler twine, the winking neighbor, clapping like an enthusiastic metronome, a teenage boy in slippers providing commentary, she's like a fluffy train, in it, and L with her hand at my spine every time the sheep zigged. Eventually the U did a dramatic hop back through the gap, the farmer appeared in his Land Rover and waved in that laconic way that means cheers, girls, now go home and don't tell anyone I left the gate, and the village dispersed as if we'd just taken part in a very niche flash mob. Back in the kitchen, soap trainer steaming gently by the radiator, Elle took the screwdriver and finished what we'd started with the chair. She worked the last nail out with her bottom lip caught between her teeth and then flipped the lining back with a flourish like a magician. We tucked the letters where we'd found them, added a note of our own folded small, just our initials, the date, and still us, and then put the tin back in the airing cupboard because apparently that's our house safe. Now. I called Mum to tell her about the M and Nellie of it all and she made a noise like she was physically restraining herself from commandeering a parish newsletter. Of course those chairs have stories, she said, in the tone of a woman who has been right about furniture her entire life. Put a ribbon on that cornflower and don't you dare let the dog eat history. I assured her B had only attempted to lick 1957 once, and she went quiet for a second and said, I'm so glad, darling, in a way that made me want to go find 11 past versions of myself and tell them to hold on. There have been tiny moments that keep rearranging me. Elle took her own kettle across to her house that evening to boil water and brought it back still warm because the power was sulking and I said, you are ridiculous, and she said, well somebody took my coffee machine away, and we both had to sit down and laugh and put our faces in our hands like we were 80. She wrote her sister an actual letter about us because it seems fitting, and in return got a postcard with a drawing of a bus stop and the words, about time, nerds, which is as good a family crest as any. I keep catching her looking at the chairs like they're benign witches and then at me like she's grateful to live in a place where witches give you furniture. This afternoon we walked up to the ridge and took the long way round past the little cut through. At the top we stood where the hedge makes that accidental window and watched the village pretending there wasn't a storm warning again tomorrow. Elle slid her fingers into mine and said, do you feel like we've nicked something? And I said, what? And she said, time, and I wanted to say yes and also no because it feels like the opposite, like we've been given something back that was always meant to be ours. I didn't say any of that because it sounded stupid in my own head. I said, maybe, and kissed her, and then B tried to eat a cowpat with the confidence of a dog who has never met consequences, and we had to carry her home again with our faces doing that laugh grimace you can feel in your cheeks for hours. We haven't framed the photograph yet because I don't trust myself not to fumble it like a cursed ring and send it into another realm, but it's propped against the coffee canister on the counter, and every time I catch it out of the corner of my eye I get this little thrum of something bigger than both of us. We scrubbed the bus shelter, too, took a cloth and a flask of tea and made an afternoon of it, and if anyone asked why we were wiping down public seating like very earnest goblins, no one did. Mr. Flatcap raised his hat a fraction as he went past. Still us? He said, as if he were checking a line in a play, and Elle answered for both of us. Still us, she said, and then bumped my shoulder with hers, and the whole stupid beautiful day, lined up behind it like a queue of dominoes waiting to fall the right way. Update 4. The village newsletter turned up like it always does, folded into itself and damp around the edges, except this time it had been slid through my door with a second, older envelope tucked into its crotch like a secret. For the girls in the white cottage, someone had written on the front in proper copperplate, the kind of handwriting that knows how to behave in church. Inside, a paper bus ticket so thin with time you could almost see the ink through it, fourpence stamped in one corner, and on the back, in pencil, a neat E and then a phone number. I stood there with my thumb on the graphite like I might smudge 70 years back into the present and Elle said, from the hallway where she was engaged in delicate negotiations with B over a stolen sock, do that face again and I'm going to faint, so we rang it, because of course we did. Her name is Margaret M. She said it like a joke we'd both been waiting to hear. She lives 2 villages over in a care home that smells, she assured us, cheerfully, of soup and polish and too much radio too, and if we didn't mind standing in the garden like visiting dignitaries she would like to see the photograph we have, please and thank you. I don't think I've ever got my coat on so fast. We put the picture between two chopping boards because we've learned, now, about not trusting our idiot hands, and we walked over because it felt wrong to drive such a short distance when what we were carrying had crossed an entire life on foot. She is small and exact and has cheekbones that could still win a war. We stood on the gravel with our masks on and our hearts in our mouths while the care home staff wheeled her out to the French doors with the blanket tucked tidy round her knees, and when she saw the photo she put her hand flat against the glass and made a little sound that I don't think was designed for anyone else to hear. "Oh, my girl," she said, and then, because she must have been magnificent once and is no less so now, she pressed her thumb to the pane like a seal and said, quite businesslike, "We were idiots about hair scarves, but we had good legs." I held up the letters, the corner of 1957 peeking like a shy thing, and her mouth did a thing like she'd found an old friend in the bread aisle. "You put them back, didn't you?" she said, sharply, and I said yes, and she softened at the door like the sun had swung round. "Good. I hid them in the chairs so my mother wouldn't find them, and your grandmother bought the chairs at the sale after I married a man who liked clocks and silence." Nell, Eleanor, had hands that smelt of peppermint and bread flour. She could ring up the till with her eyes shut. We met every Wednesday and every lie we told was dull on purpose. "She died in 2003, she said, and that was just a door opening and shutting somewhere both at once. There's no shame in happiness," she added, brisk as a nurse. The shame was all the looking away. We didn't know what to do with our faces. I wanted to say I was sorry like a person who had any right to be and also thank you like a person that does, and in the end I just held up the picture so her eyes didn't have to work, and she told us about the bus driver who pretended his engine had flooded whenever they were running late, and Mr. Flatcap, James, bless him, couldn't keep a secret if you poured it in him. He told us when the police were doing checks on the ridge, so we took our flirting to the shop and terrorized the beetroot, and we laughed into our masks and then cried into them and fogged our own faces in a way that would be disgusting if it weren't the sweetest thing I have ever done in a car park. "Put something there," she said when we started to say goodbye, and the there didn't need explaining. She tilted her chin in the direction of the village in a way that made me feel 12 and told off. "Something small. Not a plaque you need to ask permission for or the council will get their rule books out and die of it." She smiled like a fox. "Something you can deny if a vicar gets involved. And bring me bread from the shop if you're coming again." The new girl flings it about like a drummer. We walked home on that weird cotton wool air you get after big emotions, where noise bounces off you instead of in. Elle's knuckles brushed the back of my hand in that deliberate way that means here we go, we are going to do a thing, and before I'd figured out what the thing was she'd already become the thing. She detoured across to the winking neighbors, rapped on the fence, and said, in the tone of someone ordering a hit, "Do you know a man who can engrave small words on metal, and keep his mouth shut?" The winking neighbor, who was possibly the social equivalent of Witch Hazel, narrowed her eyes with glee and said, "My nephew has a van." By tea time we had a biscuit tin of possibilities. The teenage boy in slippers offered us his 3D printer and then lost interest when he realized it can't produce crisps. Mr. Flatcap brought round a handful of old brass washers for weight, which turned out to be a key for a Victorian gas lamp, because of course he once took something apart and never put it back. Elle, who is ferociously competent in all areas except ice cubes, sketched on the back of a takeaway menu until the words looked right both big and small. We tried them both, out loud and in our mouths. "Still us," said Elle, and tested it against my shoulder, my wrist, my pulse, like she was checking my size. "Still us," I said into the middle of her hand like a promise. Margaret had asked for small, for deniable. We went with a disc the size of a tuppence piece and the kind of screw that makes a satisfying little click if you twist it just right. We did it at dawn because that is the hour when the parish council sleeps without dreams. The bus shelter was damp and a bit bruised from the storm. There was a gum constellation under the bench from every teenager who has ever tried to be immortal with a Wrigley's. The air had that metal taste you get when the church bell is thinking about it. Mr. Flatcap leaned against the low wall and pretended to read the sports section upside down while keeping watch. The winking neighbor stood at the corner of the lane cupping her hands round a flask like a detective with tea, and Elle knelt with a little screwdriver between her teeth, solemn as a surgeon, while I held the tiny disc steady with my fingertip and tried not to shake. B, who had been told twice leave it and decided to interpret that broadly, made one wild grab for the ribbon we'd brought for our own silly swish and bolted down the lane with it like a bride at a rave. The teenage boy in slippers gave chase in socks. It was chaos and also everything was fine. When the screw bit the wood there was this microscopic resistance, the shelter protesting the imposition and then allowing it. The disc settled into place like it had been waiting. "There," said Elle, very quiet, like people talk in museums when they want time to behave, and we both stood back and stared at something only we could see for a second, which is, I suspect, the actual definition of love. We did not, as it turns out, get away with it. The parish councillor, who has a foam roller and opinions, appeared at the precise moment I was wearing 7 different expressions of guilt and was halfway through a sentence that contained the word heritage twice, and you could see her lungs swell for a proper do. And then Mr. Flatcap did the most outrageous thing I have ever seen him do. He stepped forward, tipped the flat cap like a curtain, and said, "It's a memorial," with the gravity of the cenotaph, and then added, after a beat, "Private, with the friendliness of a pint." The winking neighbor, who has never met an opportunity for theater she didn't marry, put a hand to her heart and said, "It is, Denise," and the counselor, Denise, of course, deflated like someone had taken a straw out. Ah, she said, unsure now of where to put her virtue. Well, in that case, carry on, but no bunting. We all nodded solemnly like bunting was a weapon. The teenage boy in socks reappeared with the ribbon wrapped around his ankles, and B looked extremely pleased with herself, and this is how a monument gets born in our place: 1 screw, 3 liars, and a dog with bad intentions. We took Margaret the bread the next day, the crusty round from the bakery that's basically a religion if you grew up within 10 miles, and Elle held the phone up so Margaret could see our ridiculous coin of a thing. Oh, she said, lips thinning in a way that made her look suddenly not 80-something but 20-something and scandalous. Good. Small. If they try to take it down, tell them I've outlived 4 vicars and a baker with big ideas, and nothing terrible happens if you mind your own flour. She pressed her palm to the glass again, and this time I matched mine to it without thinking, and it felt like the same hand, just with a lot of weather in between. There were other tiny things that week that felt like a continual conversation with the past, and also like we were starting a new one of our own. Mum turned up at the end of the drive with a Tupperware of shortbread and 2 blue cornflowers wrapped in wet kitchen roll. She wouldn't come in because rules are rules, but she stood there beaming at us like a car headlight and said, "You've started an absolute riot in the Y," which is the sort of sentence that makes a person want to live forever. She looked at the disc, she squinted, then took out her glasses, then pretended she had been able to see it the whole time so as not to concede defeat to a hedge, and then she said, apropos of nothing and everything, "Right, well, if she's moving that coffee contraption into your kitchen, perhaps we should accept that chairs lead to appliances." And Elle, who had carried the machine across the road that morning and put it on my counter like a declaration of sovereignty, went pink to her ears, and then outrageous in the mouth, and kissed my jaw right there on the doorstep where God and Denise could see. We've begun doing that bag by bag migration people do when they don't want to call it what it is in case it hears and runs away. A jumper, a favorite mug, the basil plant with opinions. She brought over 2 cookbooks that looked like they'd been taught to read by her grandmother, and I cleared another drawer and then pretended not to see her tuck a t-shirt into the back of it as if she was storing a thunderstorm. She took my spare key off the lanyard and threaded it onto her house keys, and then put the whole thing on a ring that jingles when she walks so I can tell she's coming up the path without looking. We are both so daft about it I can feel my sternum smiling. The village did an unveiling of the thing we specifically did not unveil. Someone decided to check the shelter for structural soundness and turned up with a clipboard and a bottle of kava, and then 3 more. Someone's happened to walk by, and then the postie lingered on his round, and then Mr. Flatcap produced a speech from his coat like it had been waiting there since the 70s, and I thought, fine, this is how we do everything now, in that morally ambiguous space between planned and inevitable. He said, "It's only a bus stop," and then, after a small swallow of something that might have been grief or pride or both, "And it's where everything happens." He nodded at us and the disc like it was a medal we'd earned. The teenage boy in slippers recorded it for his story. Denise clapped first, suddenly very human, and then pretended she hadn't. We didn't cut a ribbon because the ribbon was on B, who had made it a personal torso accessory, but Elle squeezed my hand until the bones lined up, and I thought, well, fine. We get to keep the stupid beautiful world we built out of running routes and dog treats and unsensible weather in the hands of women who were clever enough to hide letters in chairs. Later that night, when the village had gone back to pretending it doesn't know every beat of our day, Elle leaned against my sink in her socks with the coffee machine sulking behind her and said, very casual and devastating, "When I'm here it feels like my house thinks I live in it," which is such an Elle sentence I wanted to fold it up and keep it behind the disc. I said, because apparently somewhere between finding love and hiding things under seating I morphed into a person who can do terrifying honesty, stay, and she did, and the spare toothbrush looked so happy about it I could have framed it. Work has noticed exactly nothing because we are very professional women who never let emotion anywhere near our laptops, except for the bit where I forgot I was on camera and reached off screen and pulled Elle into view by the sleeve to ask if she wanted tea, and my colleague, who has 3 children and no time for nonsense, said, "Oh good, the girlfriend makes sense, you look like you've slept," and then went straight back to budgets as if she hadn't just lobbed a grenade of kindness over the fence. Elle's sister sent us an actual envelope of cornflower seeds with a note that said, "For the spot by the shelter, feral lesbians forever," which made me laugh so violently I scared the cat that we do not own. We went to the ridge yesterday evening because the light was doing that thing where it's not from the sun so much as it is from someone who loves you, and at the top there was a little jam jar on the post, empty and clean, a scrap of ribbon tied round its neck. No note. No ceremony. It was just there, waiting, like the village had held its breath and then set it down. We didn't put flowers in it because the hedges are full of blackberries coming, and even I know better than to debury a hedgerow, but we stood and looked at the jar like idiots anyway, and then Elle leaned in and bumped her shoulder against mine and said, without any fuss at all, "Still us," and the words clicked onto the day like a lid. We took a loaf to Margaret this morning. She was reading the paper with her glasses pushed up on her head like a teenage boy, her hair a silver wave that made me want to paint things, and she said, "Well?" In that way old people have when they know the answer is yes. "Still us," I told her, like a password, and she nodded, satisfied, as if we had returned something borrowed right on time. Then she told me to make sure I soak the chairs with when it's hot so the joints don't give, and I think I might have to agree to outlive 4 vicars and a baker with big ideas just to do as I'm told.